Hey guys, Ivan Lima here, and we will talk about after insert trigger in SQL Server today. Okay, later on we should have a video also on updates, deletes instead of trigger, but today we only gonna focus on the after insert and try to get the perfect trigger for our application. Okay, um, for that we're gonna be using few tables. I have here actually quite a bit of lines. As you can see, there's like about 700 lines because we're gonna be dissecting this trigger line by line and understand how to get to the almost perfect trigger, I would say. And and I'm gonna attach this script in my GitHub. I'm gonna leave the link down, so if you need it, go ahead and download so you can run that for yourself. But we're gonna be using few tables. We're gonna be using a error log. And this error log I love to use for any application I do because that helps quite a bit. Okay, you're gonna understand why later on. But the main tables that I want to talk about will be the person and the person audit. So I'm gonna drop and recreate them if they already exist. And the person is gonna be the main table, okay? And we're just gonna have two information: first name, last name, timestamp, and the person ID, which is the primary key. I like naming primary keys, foreign keys, any type of constraint, but in this case, we don't really care. We just want to talk about triggers, and this table is going to go away. That's not the table that, it's going to be, of course, in any type of production. Hopefully, right? So the same for person audit, right? And here it's the exact same thing, except for the name. And we don't have a primary key here. And the reason is if we're going to hold a history here, if we put a primary key here, and that would be a unique constraint, then we would have issues later on with the history because you would fail, right? In inserts, that's usually not the case because the person ID will always going to be different. But when we do updates, that would be the case. So in this case here, it wouldn't make much difference, but eventually you would when we start doing updates, right? Or deletes. Instead of doing a primary key, we could create a cluster index on the exact same person ID, and that's advisable to do that, especially if this is going to be doing any type of report. But we also don't care about this right now, okay? So let's just remember that we have the same structure, and that's good enough, okay? So I already ran that, I think, but let me run it again. And if I select from it, got nothing, right? So now we're going to create the trigger. And let me just show one thing here. If I take out this go, okay, sometimes when you're creating triggers, we see this and you're like, oh my gosh, what's going on? Something is broken here. Oh, it's just because a trigger, just like a short procedure, it needs a go, okay? And you're going to see that triggers, they work very similar to short procedure in the way that you can do virtually anything inside. You can put any business logic, you can put any logic, but we should be careful when putting logic in a trigger, like to do business stuff, because trigger is not really for that. Trigger is more to it's to be more specific on certain things. Like in this case here, I want to do one thing once I do an insert, and hopefully that thing is not business, right? Maybe the business should have put in the start procedures instead. All the business that must be done, and then the trigger would just be called for a specific thing. And the reason, one of the main reasons for that is performance. Okay, this will be executed once we in that case, try to insert something. And we'll see that later on. But I'm going to create this first trigger here, okay, and see how it works. All right, so create a trigger. Now the trigger is there, as it's saying here, right? You can also check this in here. So if I come here and I have, let me refresh here my tables, refresh it. These other tables here, 1, 2, 3, 4, it's for the index video I made before. But here for person, if you actually come here to the DBO person and you go to triggers, now you're going to see there is one trigger there, right? And that's the one that I created here, okay? We can, just like in the start procedure, we can create or alter, which means that if later on I make a modification, the modification for that trigger will be changed, of course. So, but then I want to see what's going to happen, right? I'm going to try to insert into the person table first name and last name. And I'm also picking up from the same table person, where 0 equals to 1, which means that nothing is going to be inserted, right? Well, first of all, this already doesn't have anything. If I just run this, the person, I know that has nothing in there. That's fine, but this is just because I'm going to be using this over and over. And then I just want to show you something. So if I try to do insert, Let's see what's going to happen. Well, actually, I don't like this here yet, so I'm just going to turn this off. Later on, I'll turn it on, okay? All right, so let me go back here because I don't want to have to read a lot of text. Let me try to do the insert again. Okay, so it's saying the TI person trigger was called. Okay, by convention or by standards out there, the way you create a trigger, it's in this case here I'm just using the play schema, but it's a good idea to actually put the schema here and then T as a trigger and I as insert and then the name of the table where this trigger is on, right? So this case is person, right? But I'm saying here to print whenever this trigger is called to print it. And we saw here that when I ran this, even though nothing was inserted, this trigger was called. Okay, that what that tells us is that even if there's no insert, if you call the insert will run and it will call the trigger or it will trigger the trigger, right? So um, if we have any type of logic inside of here, and we'll see that later on, things are going to get executed no matter what if you insert or not. So let's say that you try to insert something that in that case shouldn't be because we have some type of filter in the insert, right? Maybe we should make sure that before we do any logic here, we make sure that we have something to really be inserted, and we see how to handle that in a bit, okay? Which is here, right? I have here another trigger, and let me create that. And that one is for row count. And I put this in here so that I can remember what to talk about here, because again, there's like a lot of lines in there, right? So I created this trigger now, and let's see, we have a row count big. What is row count big? Row count big just tell us what was the last transaction, how many records were affected, right? In this case, if it's an insert and I inserted one record, this would show me a number, like row count big would show me a number, okay? So in that case, it's saying, okay, if row count is big equals to 0, then do this, call this trigger. If row count big, then I have another, and I will return, right? Meaning, if there's any logic after that, any logic after here, so this won't probably be called, right? Because I'm returning and I'm done with my trigger. And that's great because there's no insert to be done in here, right? And then I have another one here saying if not exist, select one from inserted. Do this, which this one seems kind of like, I mean, the purpose of this is kind of like the same as this, right? Because this one is saying if there's an insert, this one is actually saying if there's anything in the inserted table. But what is the inserted table? Inserted table is, imagine as a temp table, or it's just a virtual table created on the insert time that has information of what was inserted. Okay, this you're gonna see for insert triggers. Okay, you're not gonna see for update. I'm sorry, update you actually see for delete. You're not gonna see that for delete. Okay, so this is again a virtual table there that has anything that was inserted. It could be a row or it could be a record, a batch of records, right? So if you insert like 100 at one time, 100 records at one time, then this would have all the 100 records. If I only insert one, then it will only have that single one, right? But why am I doing this too? Okay, and we're gonna talk as we go along. We're gonna see if we should do those two or not. What are the issues with this one, and what are the issues with this one, and how to think about putting both or not. Okay. So I think I already created, but let me do it again just to make sure. Right. So doing that. Now I'm gonna do the exact same query that I had here. Okay, so I'm gonna have that repeated over and over for a bit. Like as I can see here, there's nothing here. So but I'm gonna try to insert. Right. All right, I went there, and now let's see what was called. The TI person trigger was called, but there's no insert from row count big. So he called this and returned. He didn't execute any of this here. Okay. All right. So then we say, okay, why is that good? Well, actually, this is not a this holds already a value, so it doesn't really have to do any select. It just goes there, pick up the value, and based on that, is going to return if this gets executed, then, or if this if gets executed, it just returns, and the trigger doesn't have to do much, and I think our performance will be better, right? Because if we don't have a body of things to execute here, then we're gonna have better performance, right? But then let's say this. Let's say that I wanna, this is actually something I like to do, okay? Um, and by that I mean sometimes I like to, if I'm creating triggers or procedures, since I like to log possible issues coming from the trigger or from the store procedure, I like to give a name to the process and insert in a table later on, okay? And we'll see that later. But here in this case, I'm gonna put this declare process varchar equals to ti person. And then I'm gonna, that's the only thing I change. Everything else is exactly the same, okay? I only put something before the if row count big. So let me do that. Let me execute. And, well, if I actually run this one here first, which is the same as the previous one, right? We're gonna have insert, it's gonna call, again, you went into this if statement. The TI person trigger was called, but there is no data in the inserted virtual table, right? Well, sorry, no, actually, you went through here, right? So actually, it didn't go through here. I'm sorry, and that's the main difference I want to show. He came to this one, right? It's saying that, look, nothing was inserted, but it came to the second one. And why is that? Well, the reason is because this is not only about insert. This is about anything. So I have a statement here, okay? And this statement is doing something, right? So now this row count big is actually not equal to 0. All right. In fact, if I actually do this, let me just try one more thing here. Let me try print row count big. Let's see what we're gonna get here. Let me run this again. Oh, not this one. This one. So you see, it's giving me 1. So it's not really about an insert or update or delete. It's about any statement that came before, right? So now this is equals to 1, even though there was no insert, right? You see there was no insert here, right? So that's, I'd say, one of the main issues with row count big, but there are ways around it, okay? Then we might say, okay, but why don't we use this then? Just forget about this and then we just use this. We'll get there, okay? Don't worry about it. We get there. Let me just run this again, and let me show you one more thing. So I'm gonna run this, and then I'm gonna, instead of, so here we already know that it's calling the virtual table, it's coming to the second, the not exist one, instead of this one, even though I would expect for this one to do it. If I check the execution plan here, now I see actually 2 things. I see one for the insert itself, as you can see here, insert, and I see one for the select one from inserted, which is what I'm using here, right? So maybe one of the reasons that I would want to use row count big is because I wouldn't have the second statement. And let me prove that to you. Let me come back here because I know this one here is working fine, right? So let me come here, run this again, and then if I do this insert and I go to the execution plan, look, there's no other plan for it. This is already in memory, this row count big, right? It is done when a statement was executed, right? So that's one of the reasons why we would want to use row count big. But now we see that this is going to throw away, right? Because now this is creating another guy, right? And because it's creating another one, it's creating a row count. It's not calling this as I expected. So if I was counting only the row count big, my trigger would be executed if I didn't have this guy here, right? So running that again, let's see. All right, so this execution plan shows me those 2 being in the plan, right? Okay, but I want to insert actually a real value now. I want to insert my name here into this table. We'll see what's going to happen. Let's see that. I didn't insert. Let's see. Let's check the execution plan. As we saw, it's again coming from selecting one from inserted, and there was an insert, in fact, right? And we'll select from person here. Let's see if my name is there. Okay, my name is there now. And let's see if this was insert into the person audit. Of course, it wasn't. The reason is I don't have any logic here, right, for that to be inserted. But I know that this time, let me do this again. I know that this time, even though this, I mean, he had to execute this, right? But I also see that the TI person trigger was called and it did this, oh, it's thing. Okay, this is misspelled. It did its thing. It's, not this, it's thing. I'm gonna save that so that I can later on put that in the, oh, not this. I can later on put in GitHub again. All right, so let me run this. So the trigger now did its thing, right? Did its thing. Great, awesome, right? And again, if since I inserted twice, I'll see 2 records on the person, but I'm not going to see anything in the person audit because I haven't done anything yet, right? Or 3 in that case. Okay, great. I want to make a change now. I'm going to take this statement where I'm declaring a variable, and I'm going to put after the row count bit, right? So let's do that. That's the only change I'm making. Execute. Okay, now I'm gonna do an insert with this first, right? This, I know it's gonna return nothing, right? So let me just do the insert. And what happened is the TI person trigger was called, but there's no inserts from row count big. So now I see that because I moved this down here, this was called. And that's great because now, again, my execution plan doesn't have 2 things in it. It just has the insert, try to do the insert, doesn't do it, row count big is 0, right? So what does that tell me? If I move the statements out of here to here, we're good, okay? So that would be any statement. So one of the things that we like to do, especially in store procedures, set no count on, right? If I put that in here, that's a problem because the row count big will count that as a statement that was executed and it will return a different number. All right. So anything that we do, it has to be after the row count big. If we do before, that's a problem. That's why I see a lot of bugs sometimes that people don't understand why things are not working. You know, some of the places where I worked before. So that's the reason why. Okay. So now we know that. Okay, great. I will then try to insert this again. Now I'm inserting a record, right? So how many I had before? 3, I guess. I had 3, so now I'm gonna have 4, hopefully. Okay, let me see the execution plan. Okay, it's calling the select one from inserted, meaning it's executing this to make sure that, you know, this is not the case. And in that case, it was not the case. So it did its thing again, and this is also wrong. Its thing. Its thing. It did its thing. All right, awesome. Now, if I select one person, now I have one more record, right? Nothing here still. That's fine. We're going to get there. And it's going to be now. Insert into person audit. Okay, so I'm going to insert now. Now I have, besides what we had before, which was the row count big, the no count in this case here I'm putting here, right? The process, which I'm putting all after the row count big. I have the exact same thing with the insert into the person audit. Okay, so let me add this, and then I'm gonna try to do an insert without anything. Let's see where that's gonna stop. It's stopping the row count big, as we already know what that is. Also, I mean, number of person will be the same, right? And there's nothing here. Shouldn't, right? Now I'm gonna try to do, again, I'm gonna try to insert my name. So we had 4, now we're gonna have 5. Let's see. So we did that. Let's see what happened in the execution plan. Now we have 3. We had 1 for the insert in the person. We had the select one from inserted from the virtual table. And because it passed, we had an insert in the person audit. So I'm actually expecting to see records in both places. All right, so in this one here is the same as this one. The same timestamp because this was the one that was inserted in the person audit, right? This other ones was before the person audit insertion, right? So now we're like, oh, okay, great, this is working, right? And also, let me do this again because I want to show one more thing. So I'm gonna insert again. And we see that the person trigger was fired and worked successfully, meaning that he got up until this point. So we are good to go, right? Great. Let's go to the next one. I want to force an error in the trigger just to see what's going to happen with the whole transaction, right? And I'm not going to put any transaction. I'm not going to stipulate that's a transaction. I'm not going to try a commit. I just want to see what is the default behavior of a trigger when I try to insert anywhere, be insert procedure or be anywhere, and then get the trigger to run later on. The way I'm going to force this trigger to error is going to be I know that let's see, this is line 241. I'll come back to this in a little bit. But here, we saw that the first name was only 10 that I put here, okay, which is the same as the person, right? But I'm going to force this by trying to insert more characters inside of my table, okay? So I'm going to try to insert, I've just put first name many times. First name, first name, first name, first name. And since I'm going to use Ivan, that's going to be 4, 8, 12, 16. So it's going to fail, right? Because my table do not support 16 characters, right? So I'm going to force that in. I just want to see what's going to happen. So the exact same thing with exception of that concat. All right, create a trigger. Now I'm going to try to do, again, to insert nothing. And again, we have the row big count just coming out of here. We only had one thing in the execution plan, so we're good. And if we try to check here, we're going to see the last 2 records that we had previously and the 6 records that we had in person, right? Okay, great. Now I'm going to try to insert this, right? And we'll see what's going to happen. Whoa, look at that. It's saying, hey, string or binary data would be truncated in the table, person audit. So, and then it tells me what is the problem, where is the problem, right? It doesn't really actually tell me it's in the trigger. It just tells me it's in the table, right? And this type of error here, when we run in an environment where we can actually see the errors, is great. But sometimes if we're doing that through an application and we try to insert something and things doesn't work, it's kind of like, where is the problem, right? We never know, right? And we're gonna get to there. But let's see what happened to the person. Into the person audit. We remember we had 2 in the person audit and 6 in the person, right? So if I run that, I see that there's still 6. It means that it wasn't inserted in person, right? And there's only 2 also in the person audit. So yeah, it didn't work in the person audit, so it also didn't work in person, right? Even though this is going to insert in person. So that tells me what? By default, this trigger does a rollback by itself. Okay, so if I try to insert something and it fails in the trigger, it will also fail in the main script, whatever script you're using it. Okay, so that's actually a good thing, right? Because sometimes in one of the things that I had, like especially in the past, was like, what's going to happen if that's the case, right? What if it works in the insert, but then it fell in the trigger, right? Now we see what happened, right? But like when we are developing things, an application, especially a database application, we should keep in mind that the more explicit we are, the better. The better for who? For the database? No. The better for the developer, right? I don't know who's going to be taking this on next time. Who will be, right? So I want to be very explicit, right? And by being explicit is, even though I know a trigger will handle the transaction and it will roll back automatically without anything, right? And yeah, I'm going to show that to you again. I can insert this as many times as I want. Oh, it's just going to be there. Only we had nothing added, right? I want to be explicit in how can I be explicit in something like this, right? So we know there's like also this global variable called trend count. It's just tell us if there's any transaction opened there, right? In this case here for this insert, I can actually see what's going on there, right? And what to do. Like, so I made some modifications here. I did I had a I had the row count big the same here. This is the same, but then I have like another print here to tell me how many transactions are out there, and what's gonna happen, right? In this scope, what's gonna happen? At what point this transaction is actually closed, right? So I'm trying to understand that, right? And then everything else is the same, except that I also have here, I have the same. I want to see if this count, what's going to happen with this count after this it tries to insert here, okay? And if this is also going to be executed, right? So let me create this, and we will analyze step by step what's going on there. All right, so if I do this, I'm expecting to see the row count big print. Okay, great. Nothing's gonna be inserted. I don't even gonna insert in here. But if I do this now, let me try to insert. So it's saying the number of transactions before insert in person audit are 1. All right, let's see where that is. The number of transactions before insert in person audit are 1. Or this says it will be R, or I'm gonna put is. All right. And then I don't see this being called, but notice that I also don't see this being called, right? It looks like it inserted here, not insert, it tried to insert, and something happened that this did not get called, right? So once it failed here, then it just threw me the error, and then it didn't finish, right? And what we always learn, especially in programming, and that word applies also for database, we should handle those type of situations, right? Because right now I have this horrible red message here saying, hey, it doesn't work because it's truncated in person audit, and then I can go there, and then I'm gonna probably go to person audit, and I don't know, like, it's just I go to person audit and say, where at what point these things are getting added, right? Maybe, if a seasoned developer, I can think of triggers, but and then try to find what is the trigger that's being called. But this doesn't tell me much. It just tells me that it's trying to insert and it's truncating a record for first name. So I would have to find where this thing is, right? And I don't know right now. So, and it might take a little time, right? So, and again, this does not get executed, right? All right. So, okay, not what I want. If I see here, I'll see that nothing was inserted either, right? I'm still on 6 and 6, right? Um, but I have to make some changes. I'm gonna have to make some changes, right? And how I'm gonna make a change now? I'm actually gonna do a try. I'm gonna try to do a try inside of this insert, okay? And then I'm gonna see if this thing here is gonna be printed or not, right? So the only change now is gonna be a try and catch, so I can handle whatever situation I'm thrown at, right? So let's go there. Okay, create that trigger. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just gonna ignore this one. Again, I can see only 6 and 2, right? And then I'm gonna try to insert. Okay, now I see more things, right? I see the number of transactions before insert in person audit is, well, let me also change that, make sure I got this all right. And also, I'm gonna change it here. This is gonna be before, this is gonna be after, actually. After, and I'm gonna put is here, and I'm gonna run that again so we can see it, okay? And this one here is just R is, or is R, whatever. So that I understand. Let me just run this again, because I wanna know exactly where things are coming from, right? So let me run it, and let me try to insert again. All right, so I have the number of transactions before insert is 1. The number of transactions after insert. So now I know that it caught the exception here, right? And then it threw it here, right, in the catch. So I know this is being called, okay? And it's saying that the transaction is still 1, okay? And then it executes this, saying, hey, it worked successfully, even though I know it did not work successfully, right? Because if I come here and I select this, I still have 6. And I still have only 2 records here, right? So I know it didn't work successfully. So if I did this, I could have the impression that it worked successfully, but it didn't. But also, I still have this horrible error here in red. At least it's telling me, hey, something is wrong. I don't even know what is wrong, but it's just saying, hey, it got rolled back, okay? But this time, at least it tells me, okay, it's in the trigger, The trigger is the problem. Okay, then you'd have to go there and find the trigger and try to figure out what is wrong, right? But so this here, it's telling me that something is wrong, but at the same time, the trigger says, hey, I work successful because we put a try and catch, and we actually catch what was kind of like, we know there was a problem, but, and also the transaction count is still one. And so, at what point that stops should be one, right? All right. So, um, let me see why okay. What is, okay, now I know what's going on. So I'm still gonna play with this trigger here, okay? But now I'm going to have the script inside of a block. All right. And the block is, I'm going to run this inside of this trigger of this block. I'm just going to do the same insert. This time I'm going to see if I can actually pick up this train count after the insert here in this block, and also come down here after the insert. Okay. And let me see if I want to change anything. This here I'm going to say after the first block, because I know this is a block trying to do an insert. Okay, I'm saying transaction data catch, and let's try to execute this. All right, so the number of transactions before inserts is 1. The number of after insert, this is coming from the trigger, right? Those trigger here, as we saw previously, that even made a change. So it's inside of the trigger. What about this? Do we see this? And then it's saying the trigger works successfully. But do I see this? I don't see that in the message. No. I also don't see this. So I know that my insert, also, when it got to here, it didn't do anything else because there was an exception that I did not catch. Okay? So when creating a block to do any type of manipulation, maybe we should think also doing a transaction with a catch, right? Which is what I have here. I have the exact same thing, but this case I have a try and a catch. Okay, so let's keep the trigger the way it is, all right, and let's just see what's going to happen when I do this. Oh, I don't have the red stuff anymore, and I have the number of transactions before insert in personality is 1, after is 1, and I actually know things are wrong, right? And then it's saying the trigger successfully processed, which I know it's also wrong, but at least this time, this thing here is getting executed, right, as this one. And it's saying, look, there's 0 transaction count in this scope. So I know that once it leaves the trigger, the transaction gets set to 0. So the rollback, it seems that it happens after it lifted the triggers. So once it leaves the trigger, the transaction knows what it has to roll back and does the rollback for it automatically, and we're good to go. And then the turn count now is 0. Okay, great. So we don't actually have to manage that for now. But like I said, I want to be explicit, right? And we're going to see that in a bit. It also called this guy here. Sorry. Let me say something here. I said he called this guy here. It didn't, right? Because he failed right here. But he called this guy here, in fact, right? So this guy, that's the one he called, and then finished the catch, and he called this other guy here. Okay, after the catch. So now I see that this whole thing here ran, except for this, of course, because there was an exception there, right? But he went to the catch, which he did, and then he did something here, right? So what I'm trying to say is that we have to be careful also what we do after the catch, right? We have to be very careful what we do after the catch, because when we do a catch, things are going to run here, just like in a programming language, right? All right, great. So let's see if anything got inserted here. Oh, we still have 6 and 6, right? So it wasn't. Now, I want to see what is the error message, and this is just a function inside of SQL Server that's going to tell you the error that happens. What made the catch be called, right? What was exception, right? So it kind of tells you what is exception, right? So I'm going to try this again, and let me see. All right, in this case, the error message was an error was raised during the trigger execution, and the batch has been aborted and the user transaction, if any, has been rolled back. So it's telling that it was rolled back. This is the error message, right? But this also doesn't tell me much, at least for now. But I know that this was executed as well, right? We don't have any transaction count. Why? Because the rollback already happened, like this was saying here, right? So, I mean, we see there are mechanisms for us to know what is the issue out there, right? This did not get called because the exception happened here, right? All right. Now I'm gonna use that error log table. Remember the one I created there? My only purpose to create that was for this. Okay, and this is something that as developers, as database developers, or anyone who's gonna be doing things in database, this helps quite a bit. Okay, you can actually go ahead and check this out there and see what this means. Okay, like these are all functions that it's already present. You can just go there and use it, and that gives some really good information on how to go ahead into the error and look at it, right? But I'm gonna insert the error now into the error log. Okay, that's the only difference I made with this from this previous insert that I tried. So let me see what else. No, I think that's it. Yeah. So let me try to run that and let's see what's gonna happen. Okay. So we have that. We have this was called saying that it worked successfully, but again, I still know that it didn't really, and I know that because if I try to see in here in the tables, I will still have the same amount of records, 6 and 2. But now I should have something here. I should have something like this in capital. Let's start on error log. Error log. So let's see what I have in there. And I do have it, right? This is my process because I gave this name here for the process. This is just a block of code. I'm running the script, but it's telling me what was the problem. Saying that's the trigger doesn't tell me much, but only tells me this, right? That's a good point to start, right? But we're gonna make a change here now, and here I call the almost perfect trigger with prints, right? And let me see why this is an almost perfect trigger, right? There are a few things I added. When I said to be explicit, it means, hey, I know the trigger will close the transactions and do the rollback, but I know what I'm gonna do it myself to help other developers later on when they come back here, right? So I always like to use this. If trunk count, meaning if trunk count is if there is any transaction out there open, do a rollback. And that's in the catch, of course, right? I still have like this issue here with this, so I'm gonna force this to happen, right? But yeah, just remember this is done by default automatically for us, but I like to be explicit. It just helps quite a bit other people, okay? Um, and then I have, everything else here, and I also have, notice that this is the trigger, right? I'm inserting to the error log from the trigger. Can I do that? Yeah, of course, right? So let me run that. And let me try to execute this same script that I had previously. Okay, this is the exact same script. Exact same script. Okay, all right. Okay, let's see what it tells here. So these are coming from the trigger. It's saying that the trigger works successfully. There's no transactions open there. Let me actually select the person audit first. There's still 6 and 6. I know the trade didn't work successfully, didn't go all the way, but let me just tell you one thing. This is after the catch, right? And again, even for triggers, we have to be careful what we put in the catch, right? In this case here, I actually know this trigger worked in a way that it's, I would say, almost perfect. Why? Because now I have a way to debug things. Because if I come here again, right, like I said, right, and I don't see anything inserted, I'm like, oh, something is going on, right? I can come to the error log and see, okay, let me see what's going on. And here now I have TI person. It's even telling me what is the problem. It's saying, hey, look, the process TI person, by default, I know that T is for trigger and I is for insert and person is a table. So I know exactly where to go, right? And it's even telling me, hey, look, there's an issue with the first name and truncated value trying to insert this, and this. Now I can go straight there to the trigger and try to see what's going on here and try to fix this and see what is the problem, right? It's also uh, later on telling me, hey, there is the insert didn't work because we had a trigger issue, right? So now I know that we had a trigger issue and we know who was the trigger, right? So it's kind of like, oh, now it makes things much easier for me, right? So I want to talk about this here. Let me see. Just let's see. Where was I? Okay. Yeah, that was. Was that the last one? Come on, that was quick. Almost perfect trigger. Almost perfect trigger. Do I have another trigger here? No, that was the last one. I think. Yeah. Now let me say why this is almost the perfect trigger. Okay. Uh, oh, this. I think it was the one. This was the one that I ran, right? And then my almost perfect trigger was going to be this one here. I actually would maybe remove one more thing here, but I'm going to tell why this is my almost perfect trigger. First of all, I don't have any prints, right? I know exactly what happens after the catch. I know what happens that this has to be before the row count big, right? Um, Ideally, if we can, and if we were to manage a database forever, maybe we would know that, because this here is a hit on the database, that might make a little difference, right? When I'm inserting something. So we wouldn't want this, but we kind of want to play defensive. Play defensive in a way that, if this here fails, I still want to see if there's something inserted, because I don't want to try to insert if there's nothing in this virtual table, right? So, um, I mean, we would take this out and just leave this one, but then we would have to be absolutely sure there's no other statement that happens before this, right? And that's the challenge, right? So I'm going to leave this one in here, and maybe we should, because we never know who's going to take the database a year, 5 years from now. Who knows, right? So so I'll leave this in here. So, but that's something to discuss about, right? If you're looking for a high performance table, right, and this is something that's not gonna bother, maybe you don't have to have this in here, or you can even remove this, or you could just keep one of those. This one here is for sure it's gonna work. This one here is not always gonna work, right? But this one here also doesn't take much resources. This one might take a little resource, especially if you insert it is big, right? So it's something to think about, okay? So I'm gonna create my almost perfect, right? And I have the train count here, bigger than 0, and rolling back if that's the case. Again, being explicit. I'm gonna save it, and then I'm gonna try to run this. Well, and wait, this time, I actually got rid of the concat, right? So now I fixed the error. The error here was that we had this concat somewhere in here, right? Now I fixed it. I found out where the problem is. I fixed it. So I run that, right? So if I try to run this, let's see what's going to happen. Oh, one more thing. I'm very defensive when creating a store procedure or any block of script, right? You saw that I have this train count here on the trigger itself. I also have it here on my um, block of code. This case is not a store procedure, but this could be a store procedure, right? So in this block of code, I also have that in here, okay? So I'm gonna try to run that, and I'm checking both places, right? And again, this depends on how is your database gonna be used, right? This will take a little bit of resource, but not a whole lot, okay? Because it's not something that you have to go there and select. It's already there, it's present, right? So if I run this, we'll see if this is gonna work. So if I check this here now, we see that now we have a new record with number 18. And like, oh my gosh, you went from 6 to 18. Well, if you know already, when you do an insert, if you delete later on, those identity columns, they keep growing, okay? So I tried to insert other 12 records, 11 records that didn't work, so only this one worked, so that's why this is 18, okay? Then I have 18 here. So I don't care if I insert again, and since I have no problem here, and I don't have any print either, right? Because I removed all the prints. Prints are usually good for debugging, okay? If you don't need to debug, if it's after you've done debugging, you can actually remove, unless you need some other type of information you're going to be running here on the command line, something like that, then it's good too. But otherwise, you don't need that, right? So I'll always log everything in here into this table, which is error log, right? So if I do that again and I try to do my insert, add another one, right? So we're good. So now we know we have like the almost perfect. And I also say almost perfect because there's always something to improve, right? Let's always think that way. There's always something that we can improve, but sometimes we also don't want to be on the game of improving every single aspect because that takes long, right? It's about time as well, right? I'm gonna drop this again, these two tables, because I want some fresh data there. Because now I want to compare performance with triggers and without triggers. We saw how the execution plane looks already, right? I'm gonna create this trigger here again, my almost perfect trigger. Let me create that. All right, and then I'm going to insert a bunch of, I'm going to insert 50 records. Okay, and this is not in a batch. This is one by one. When I do a go with a number, it's going to insert 50 records. It's not in a batch. Okay, the trigger is there. Okay, the way you can see if the trigger is there, you can do that into SQL, but an easier way would also just become here and see how this looks like. I refresh because I know I recreated everything. If there's no sign here, and I'm going to show you how it works in a little bit with when it's inactive, but this here is an active trigger, right? I'm going to insert 50 records. Let's see how long that's going to take. So only for 50 records, it's taking quite a bit, more than I would expect, I think, even with the trigger. But maybe it might be my computer. So we finally finished, right? If I come here, I'm going to see that I have 50 records in each. I have 50 records here, and I also have 50 records here, right? So, and it took 15 seconds, as we saw there, right? Now, I'm going to delete this again. Not the error log, I just want to delete the table, person audit. So 15 seconds, about 15 seconds, and I'm not counting logical reads and things like that, not worried about that right now. This time, since I dropped the table, and if I try to come in the trigger, there's nothing there, but let me actually say that I create the trigger. Right? How are we going to see that it's actually not active? Let me create the trigger. Right, I can see that it's not active because, well, right now it's going to be active, right? Right now it's active. I can just do a disable here using SQL, and that's how it's going to look. Refresh. You see that green, the red cross in there. That means that it's not active, right? I could also come here and make it active, enable, or disable through here, but that's fine. We have this, so I know the trigger is not on, right? And in fact, if I have anything, if I check here, nothing is there. Let's see how long it's going to take to insert 50 records. So it took 3 seconds. The other one took 15 seconds. This one only took 3 seconds, which is 5 times more. Okay, and that's only from one simple trigger, right? Just for insert, right? So we see there's a pretty big difference there, right? But again, this was row by row. I inserted 50 rows, inserted first one, inserted second one, inserted third one, and so forth, right? What I want to do now is I want to enable the trigger again, okay? And I want to insert with the trigger enabled these 50 records into the person table again, okay? Now, since I enabled the trigger, right, my trigger here is going to be active. It's going to be inserting the person audit. Since I don't have any person audit there, we're going to have 50 records here, and it's going to have, well, sorry, we're going to have 100 here at the end of the day, and here we're going to have 50, right? So let's try to do that and see what's going to happen. It was pretty quick, right? So now that I inserted in a batch, meaning I inserted 50 at one time, it was actually not bad, right? So if I do that again, let's see how long it took. It didn't take even a second. But let me go back and let me do something else because I want to actually see So, oh, I don't want to off. I want to on. I want to. Now I'm worried about the logical reads. How that's gonna play, right? Especially the logical reads, right? So let me turn this on, and let me delete this again because I want the exact same amount of records to be inserted. And I'm also gonna open. Let me open my statistics parser, which is one of the tools that I love to use online, right? This guy here. Open this. All right, close it. And I already dropped the table. Yep. So let me create that trigger. Why is that trigger? Okay. First, I'm gonna insert 50 records. Okay. This one here that takes, I guess we saw about 15 seconds, right? But I don't want to see the logical reads for that one because this is just a one by one. And I don't really care much. Let's see how long it's going to take again. It's going to take about 15 seconds. And we saw that this one could perform pretty bad, right? If I come here and I see the select, I have 50 and 50. Now what I want to do with the enable trigger, I want to insert those 50 records again inside of my person. So I'm going to have 100 here and 100 here. Okay, so let me do that with the trigger enabled, right? So it was pretty quick, right? It was less than a second. And if I actually, if I actually copy this, I want to check how that behaved, right? We see that it shows the person, 205 logical reads, okay? And then we have another 50 for the person audit, with total 255, counting the work table, everything, right? So this is how much, and this is kind of the time that it took, right? So let's keep that in here. We're gonna be back on this in a bit. Actually, let me open another one. Just open another one here. Okay, I'll open this one because we're gonna then compare those two, right? Okay, now I'm gonna delete the table again because I wanted the exact same amount of records. Okay, so it's gonna be this, and then I'm going to run the trigger, create the trigger. And maybe I didn't even have to create, but let's create. So we see that with the disable, but I'm gonna disable the trigger, right? So that trigger is not gonna be used. If I refresh there, you see that the trigger is not used, okay? And I'm going to, first of all, let me insert this. I know this is gonna take much less, right? Because I don't have the trigger. It's gonna take 3 seconds, about 3 seconds. All right. I don't have anything in person audit, only have in person. And I'm going to insert now the 50 records again without the trigger in a batch. Did that. Let's compare this. Okay, now we had how much CPU? We had a little bit less. The difference is pretty much how much it was inserted in the person audit, which was 50, right? So it was the 50 less, right? In the time, but the time, let's see what the time, right? The time is less, a little bit less. Um, uh, not significantly less, but it's still a little bit less, right? So that tells me that in a batch, things will work, the trigger will still take a hit on the performance, but it's not going to be as bad as a single row. And then you say, well, but I only want to insert single rows, right? And that might be the case in a day-to-day database and transaction database, right? But there's certain projects sometimes where we have to do migration of data. And when we're doing migration of data, sometimes we are inserting millions of records into a specific table because of the migration after the transformation, whatever we have to do, right? And that specific migration, I've seen that happen many times. And we don't know why the migration is taking so long. That might be one because you're not inserting in a batch. Okay, maybe if you're inserting row by row in a million records, you see that your time could take 3 times more than regular, right? So that might be one of the case. So it's always best to do in a batch, and maybe even consider, do I need a trigger for that migration? Because maybe I don't, right? There's some migration that you don't need a trigger. Maybe you migrated from one system to the other, and there's certain records that we don't need. You don't need the audit. I don't know, whatever it is, right? Think about first, do I need a trigger for that? And if you don't, just disable the trigger while you're doing the migration. And after, you turn back the trigger just to do the day-to-day inserts. But for the migration process, no, you might not need a trigger, right? So that's something to take into consideration when we're doing a trigger, right? So at the end of the day, this would be my almost perfect trigger. Okay, I would have, again, the row count big. I would have the not exist, which will also consume some of the resources in the database, but that might help me because I would rather do this than do an insert. Insert, especially, as we know, insert, especially on tables with clustered index, they could be costly, right? So before I do an insert, let me just see if there's anything to be inserted, right? And if there is, great. If there's not, then great either, as well, right? So I'll do that, but then it's something to think about, right? Should I use both? Again, you have to do that based on your database, what you're trying to accomplish, right? But at least one of them should be there. Okay. If we use the row count big, make sure that there's no statements before, otherwise it will throw away your trigger. You're gonna think that things are working fine, but they're not. Okay. Do whatever business processing you have to do there in your trigger, but remember that triggers is not the place to really put a lot of business processes. It triggers just like, okay, I need this thing done once an insert happen. So I'm gonna make this to happen quick and fast, because if you start putting a lot of logic in there, it's gonna degrade your system. Better put the business in the store procedure or in the script that you're creating. Okay, and do a try and catch. A try and catch will only help. This one here is something that I like to do. If you don't do, it's going to be wrong. No, but I like to do because that tells the future developer that I'm being explicit and I want the rollback to happen, even though I know triggers does that for me. Okay, and insert into the error log, and that's it. All right, guys. If you have any questions, put in the comments.